Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In our last video, we got familiar with Unreal Engine 5 by learning how to navigate the interface and manipulate objects. Today, we're taking those skills to the next level. I'm going to show you how to efficiently add, duplicate, and manage objects in your scene by using tools like Quick Add and the Content Browser. Then we will put it all together by building a simple office environment using starter content and basic shapes. This office will be the perfect setup for future tutorials where we will get a little destructive. Let's get started. Now, let's start by expanding on what we learned last time. First thing first, press G key on your keyboard to hide all the cluster widgets on your screen. Or you can go to top left on your viewport and check the game view. First up is duplication. Instead of manually placing multiple objects one by one, we can save time by duplicating. And the first way to duplicate an object, in this case the floor, is by pressing Ctrl plus D. And this will duplicate the floor object on top of the previous floor object. As you can see on the outlier, we have a new floor 2. And just simply drag it out of the way. And another way, which is my favorite way to duplicate an object, is by holding the Alt key and drag the objects towards any direction. And just like that, we quickly duplicated our previously 1 floor into 3. And now I'm just going to do the same to the second half of the floor, just to make it look a little bit nicer. Let's look at the Quick Add tool. On the toolbars, we have all the important buttons, as I mentioned in the previous video, and one of which is quickly add any object into our scene. I can drag and drop the cube object, or drag and drop the cylinder, and even can drag and drop any light source into the scene. And I'll just put a point light just for demonstration. The Content Browser is a game changer when it comes to adding more complex objects into your game scene. This is where you're going to be playing around majority of the times throughout your game development process. Hopefully, you can see the starter content folder in your Content Browser and go to the props folder. Here you can see some of the basic static meshes that is included in our project. And I'm just going to drag and drop the couch object into our scene, just like that. Now, before moving on to the next section, I want to give one pro tip to you guys. If you're working on a large scene where there's a lot of objects in your game world, organizing your objects in the outlier by maybe creating new folders into the outlier and drag and drop those set objects into appropriate folders is going to help you in the long run. So don't forget utilizing your folders. Now that we know how to add and manage objects, let's put the knowledge to work by adding a simple office scene. First, I'll create a new level and set up a basic floor and walls using cubes. So by adding a new level, go to top left on your screen, click File tab, and select New Level. Or you can use a shortcut, Ctrl and N. And here we can pick from 4 templates, and just for simplistic sake, I'm going to use the empty level. The moment you open up the new empty level, all you can see is a picture of darkness. So the first thing we're going to do is add some lighting into our scene so we can see what we're working with. Now, the very easy and quick way to add a default lighting scene into the mix is by going to the Windows tab and locate the Environment Light Mixer. Without doing any tweaking or adjusting, we can just create a skylight, directional light, sky atmosphere, volumetric cloud, and lastly, the high fog. And now let's close the tab and see our world with the newly added lighting. Just like the previous section, I'm going to press the G key to hide the widgets on the screen. Now, the first thing that we want to add to our office is the actual office itself, right? That includes the floor, the walls, the ceiling. Now, let's go back to the Quick Add tool on the top of our screen. And instead of using the cube in the shape, we're going to use the box in the geometry. The cube that we get from the shape, although it might look identical to the geometry box that we just created, but there's some fundamental differences that the engine recognizes in itself. So the box is just a very default static mesh. Now we can obviously scale the box in one direction and then make it look like a floor. But this is going to be very hard to edit in the future. What if you want to add a little hole into our floor. And at that point, we have to create maybe 2 more boxes around the original box and shrink the original box to make it look like there's a hole in the middle. And instead of that, we're just going to stick with the geometry brushes, which is also known as the binary space partitioner brushes. It's Unreal Engine's tool for level construction, which is exactly the purpose we're going to use this with. And without going into the detail too much, you're going to see the differences later down the road when we create maybe windows or doorways into our wall. Now, with that being said, I'm going to reset the location of our newly added brush to the 000 location. And now, if you remember the lesson from last video, simply press the F key on our keyboard to focus back to the box brush. And this doesn't look like the floor to me, so I'm going to select the box brush, go down in the details panel, and here I'm gonna scale it on the x-axis maybe to 1000 and scale it on the y-axis to 1000 units. And I think this is too thick of a wall to be a floor, so I'm just gonna decrease it down to maybe 100. With the floor being added into our scene, I'm just gonna grab some simple static meshes from the starter content folder, like the chair, desk, and maybe lamps to fill out the space. And don't worry about making it perfect, it's just a rough setup for now. We're focusing on learning how to place and manipulate objects for the time being. And even if you are very familiar with all these steps that I'm gonna go through, just don't focus on the detail, one step at a time. We're going to polish our game in the future. Just keep it simple. Now I'm gonna add one chair and duplicate it maybe 4 times, and maybe add the round table in front of every single chair. So duplicate it 4 more times. And maybe I'm going to add, you know what? I'm gonna add the statue on top of the tables. And maybe 2 lawn chair on the other side. And now I'm gonna hold down Control, select both chairs, and press E to go to the rotate tool. I'm gonna rotate both of them by 180 degrees and move it in place. Just like that, we have a very simple office being set up. Let me see, maybe I can add something else into our game scene. You know what? We have a lamp, which looks like a ceiling lamp as our static mesh. But instead of putting it onto the ceiling, I'm just gonna add it to our scene and, rotate it by 180 degrees. And I'm just gonna snap it to the floor so it's just a normal lamp. Find the End key on your keyboard, which should be around your arrow keys on the right side. Press End key and it will just snap it to the floor. And now, with the lamp still selected, I'm gonna move it to maybe one of the corners and duplicate it to the other side. Select both lamp and duplicate it across. So now we have 4 lamps around our chair and desks. Keep in mind, this is just my simple reimagine of any basic office, and you can do some tweaks to yours by using, the rotating tool on the top, or even scale some of the objects differently. Maybe the lamp is too little for your liking. So just quickly go to the scaling tool or press R on your keyboard and scale it, vertically, horizontally, or even uniformly to make it look nice. So now that all the decorative objects are being placed and all the furnitures are set in stone, we can finish up this room by creating the 4 wall on the side and then add a ceiling on top and call it a day. So I'm just going to quickly select the floor and I'm going to duplicate it using the Alt and drag method. But instead of Alt and moving it out of the way, I'm going to switch to the rotating tool, hold down Alt, and rotate it 90 degrees. I can just simply drag it to one side, drag it up a little bit. Now, this is not going to be perfect, but it doesn't have to be. Now hold down Alt, drag the wall to the other side, and with both walls selected, switch to the rotating tool hold down Alt and turn it around 90 degrees one more time. And I'm going to move it in place just like that. As you can see, this is a pretty small office. Maybe I want to expand it a little bit. And finally, let's finish up this room by duplicating our floor to the top of the room and close off the ceiling. And now we can just fly through the walls and look at our very small, very miniature office. And finally, before we move on to the next section, let me just add some windows and maybe one doorway into our office to make it a little bit more office-like. It's very simple. We're going to go to the quick add tool, go back to the geometry, and drag another box into our scene. And what our idea is, we're going to cut off just enough area to make a window out of it. And the best way to do it is by utilizing the brush type in our details panel, and we're going to select the subtractive. By changing the brush type to subtractive, you can see the newly added box brush is going to disappear, but don't be afraid, just drag it into our wall, and it's going to help us cut off a block from the wall to make it a window. And now I want my window a little bit longer. Maybe bring up a little bit. And if you want to add more window into the office, all we have to do is hold down Alt and drag it to the side. And maybe I want to add some wall to the other side of the wall. And instead of dragging the newly duplicated object and moving the camera, drag it again and move it again, all we have to do is hold down Shift and drag the object. That will lock our camera to the selected object, so we can easily move it and follow it along. I'm just gonna move it in place, make it a wall, and duplicate it on the side, maybe like that. And before I close out the video, I'm just going to direct you to the outliner. I'm going to help you to organize the outliner a little bit, so in the future, when the game project gets bigger and bigger, we don't get overwhelmed by our outliner. And the first thing that comes to my mind is by selecting all the lighting related objects and then add them to a folder. So select all the objects you want to add to a folder and go to top right in your outliner window and just click on the folder icon. And that will organize all the selected objects into one folder, make it organized. I'm going to click on the first window, hold down Shift, click on the final window, and group them into a folder. You can rename them or not. I don't think it's a big deal. I'm going to do the same things to the floor, ceilings, and the walls. Hold down Shift, selecting all of them. Group them to a folder. And finally, select all the furnitures, put them in a folder. And just like that, we have an organized outliner, a fully functional office environment built from scratch using basic shapes and starter content static meshes. This scene will be the perfect testing ground for our future tutorials, where we'll create a bouncy ball launcher and see how much destruction we can cause. So in the next video, we'll start diving into physics and gameplay mechanics, so make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay updated. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. I'd love to see what you're building in Unreal Engine 5, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.